The Met Police is examining over 65 cases of electoral fraud in the UK, and over 40 of those cases centre around the borough of Tower Hamlets. That's Lutfer Rahman's old stomping ground. Do you remember the old Tower Hamlets electoral fraud probe with Lutfer Rahman back in 2014? Let me jog your memory, just watch this video.
Councillor Rahman, I'm the Deputy Mayor of Tower Hamlets. I'm going to make a short statement now. Today's judgment has come as a shock. The Mayor strongly denies any wrongdoing and has full confidence in the justice system. So the result has been surprising, to say the least. We are now seeking further legal advice on the matter in relation to the judgment review. More detailed statements will be provided shortly.
So Mohammed Lutfer Rahman was the first directly elected mayor of Tower Hamlets. He was elected in 2010 and he was originally a Labour Party candidate. He won the selection process, but it came out that he had links to the Islamic fundamentalist group, the Islamic Forum of Europe. And it came out that he signed up fake members to the Labour Party in order to win the selection. So he was deselected and then stood as an independent. Interestingly, George Galloway, who's famously not a Muslim, and his Respect Party, basically praised him. They didn't go as far as endorsing him, I think, but they praised him. And so Lutfer Rahman stood in the election as an independent and he won 51% of the vote. Amazing, good for him. And then in 2014 he stood again, and this time he was the leader of the Tower Hamlets First Party. But the election was eventually declared void when he was found guilty of electoral bribery, postal vote fraud, illegally paying canvassers, and the spiritual intimidation of voters, which was an interesting one. So basically he used the Muslim voters in the area and scared them into voting for him, is the general gist of the case. And so Lutfer Rahman is actually banned from standing for election again at all. But he's back now, and for the election happening tomorrow, and he was endorsing a party in Tower Hamlets called Aspire. But now the police are back on the case in Tower Hamlets. I wonder why. Tower Hamlets is suddenly the centre, once again, of an electoral fraud storm. And it probably includes postal voting issues. Again, like it did with Lutfer Rahman and like it seems to be happening all over the country. So let's take a look at this article from the Express. The title says, Election Shock, Met Police probe 65 claims of fraud ahead of Thursday's vote. It goes on to say at least 40 of the corruption allegations centre around the borough of Tower Hamlets, which has been called out for electoral fraud and malpractice in the past. You're not kidding. During the 2014 elections, there were 164 allegations of electoral fraud and wrongdoing in the borough. Detective Chief Superintendent Sue Williams, who is in charge of the operation, told the Evening Standard, it is vital to ensure the integrity of the democratic process. So, in the run-up to the election and on the day itself, there will be a policing plan in place in Tower Hamlets. A policing plan in place for an election. We need police outside ballot stations and probably within them as well, making sure there's no electoral fraud. What country is this? Is this England? Is this real life? Back in 2016 as well, they had to consider plans for vulnerable areas. We know what vulnerable areas means. And they were considering plans of people having to take their passports to go and vote. It sounds crazy. I mean, in England, you don't even have to take your ballot card that comes through the post. You just turn up and say your name and you go and vote. Actually, if you think about it, that is a bit crazy, but in a trusting society, in a culture built on trust, doing that is fairly normal. You turn up, you say your name and you vote, because that's how our society works. We trust one another. Our entire legal system and culture is built on trust. But now, we're in a situation where trust is not good enough. And so these plans that were considered a couple of years ago, I don't know if they ever came to fruition. I don't think they did. I think probably they should actually come to fruition, and maybe more places than just the vulnerable areas should be looking at voter ID. It's necessary. These problems are happening throughout the country as well. It's not just Tower Hamlets. You've probably seen this article. A disgraced former Labour councillor who was kicked out for voter fraud is shamelessly restanding in this year's local elections. Sorry to be shallow and mean, but I mean, look at his face. I don't know if anyone ever played that game years ago on the PlayStation 1 called Abe's Odyssey. If you don't know it, look it up. I mean, funny looking dude. And he's a former Labour politician convicted of voter fraud, and he's standing in the upcoming elections using a new name, the Sun can reveal. Shafak Ahmed, 50, is running for the Small Heath ward in Birmingham, despite being found guilty over his role in a massive Labour voter fraud scam in the 2004 local elections. The temerity and the balls and the gumption that these people have to just blatantly commit electoral fraud, and then in the instance of Lutfur Rahman to just start promoting a brand new party, and then for electoral fraud concerns to happen again in the same ward. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And as Ezra mentioned, actually, recently in one of his new shows, Battleground, which I'm loving, by the way, he talked about the difference between a high trust and a low trust society. And as I just mentioned then, we live in a society built on trust, and we're clashing with a culture that isn't built on trust. It's not even built on man-made law. So is it any surprise that these vulnerable areas happen to be highly Muslim areas? Islamic culture does not allow for man-made law. It's not a society and culture built on trust in the same way that Western civilization and culture is. And so this is what happens. This is what happens in these areas where we allow ghettoization to happen, where we allow communities to become segregated and insular. When we allow this to happen, we get parallel systems of justice, parallel systems of democracy and power and control. It's incredible to see it happen in my own country, to see third world practices like this happening on my doorstep now. It's terrifying. But what it shows is a real difference between culture. And you know, some people say it's hard to define British culture. It's actually much easier to define British culture when you're faced with instances of terrible, terrible things happening that are not a part of our culture, and this is one of them. If you want to see more from me and the rest of the Rebel team, remember to download our app on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and like and subscribe.